Welcome to the Red Rose Film Club, a movie podcast that examines the wide world of cinema through a perpetually lefty, pinko, commie, soy boy, cuck, Antifa super soldier filter. But more specifically, we love movies and want to create a podcast that would appeal to the disparate tastes of our liberal, leftist, socialist, communist, Marxist, and Leninist friends. Red Rose Film Club is for leftists of all stripes who don't know what to talk about at parties other than movies and politics. My name is Craig. I work in public education and am passionate about social justice and workers' rights. My tastes range but mostly exist on opposite ends of the highbrow, lowbrow spectrum. And I'm with...
Hey, I'm Hal. I use she, they pronouns. I work in higher ed and run a food pantry. I care about food access, reproductive justice, building a robust social welfare state, and ending the state's domination through the criminal legal system. I'm a staunch defender of using magical realism to deconstruct power, and I like movies that speak truth through the vessel of the absurd. So, Craig.
Yes.
What other pop culture are you getting into these days?
Oh my gosh, I've been watching a whole ton of movies.
Love it.
Let me throw out the quick hitters. I saw All Quiet on the Western Front.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, that one.
I mean, we've talked about this before, but I love
war movies. Honestly, I think it was you saying that recently that was like, I also like war movies because I've been watching a lot. Well, I watched Platoon again at the Cap City on Friday. What was the other one I watched? Oh, Born on the 4th of July, which is amazing. I had never seen that one. And then I watched, the one that I just said, whose name I forgot. All Quiet on the Western Front.
I will say, also related to that, probably last year or the year before, I read the book for the first time. And I have to say, as an adult, there are some, like, quote-unquote classics, maybe things other people were forced to read in high school. That wasn't one of the ones I was forced to read in high school.
It was one of the ones that I did, but I remember almost nothing.
But there are... many of those books, when I read them as an adult, I'm like, oh yeah, this is a classic for a reason. And that was how I felt about that book. Yeah. So I watched the movie this second it dropped on Netflix.
Yeah, it was awesome. I'd never seen any iteration of the movies before. Had you seen any of the other ones? I think there was 2.
I don't believe so.
Because when I told my dad, I was like, hey, I was like, this is a dad movie. Let's bring this one up to dad.
It's on Netflix? Absolutely. Check.
He's like, it's not as good as the 1931. And I was like, well, first off, I didn't even know that one existed. Second off, who cares? I saw a movie, Dad.
Oh, I'm curious now. I will say, on the war movie front, yesterday I saw a Twitter thread that was people talking about the best shots in war movies.
Oh, I think I saw this also.
And I was like going in deep. I was watching every single little YouTube video.
Okay, I only saw one
that they posted.
Was apparently Tarantino said this. What was the one? Do you remember what it was?
Yes, it was 1917. Yes, that was the originator tweet.
Oh,
like really? Originator of the thread was someone posting the scene from 1917 where the guy is running across the battlefield and there are bombs dropping behind him, and the text was like, Tarantino said this is the best.
Oh shit! 'Cause I thought the one that I saw was,
and it approaches the guy's head
and he's ducking.
Yeah.
Okay, I read that as Dunkirk then when I saw it.
Oh,
I was like, was it
maybe
Dunkirk?
It was Dunkirk, and someone's like, yeah, Jesus.
It was one of those. When you think about it, those movies are very similar. I was just trying to throw it out.
Entirely different circumstances. No, you're right. The 1917 shot was put in the thread of the guy running. He is running through, but you're right. The Dunkirk shot is there's a man laying on the ground very close to the camera, and there are like bombs hitting the ground in the distance, and then it approaches him, and the camera is like shrouded in dirt that explodes. And then it kind of disappears and reveals him.
1917 one might be better though. I mean, they're both good, but.
I like 1917 better as a movie, like a total movie. Yeah. I just think Dunkirk, like, it gets a little maudlin and sentimental. Yeah. Who's the guy? Is it Colin Firth? Is that who plays it?
No, it's Kenneth Branagh.
Yes. Yeah, it just gets a little sentimental and maudlin for me towards the end, whereas, like, I mean, what I like from a war movie is, like, the existential desperation of like, this is what we had Roth, right? Like, this is what humans do to each other. And I don't want some like cheesy triumphant moment
yeah.
at the end. But I do think Dunkirk is, obviously well directed. I mean, Nolan.
We love him. There's something weird going on with him on Twitter.
Is there?
I don't know.
With
I know
Christopher
Oppenheimer's
Nolan?
coming out, and I thought so, but maybe not.
You mean surrounding him, not that he is being weird on Twitter.
Not that he's being weird, but some weird thing. This also could be a joke that I read at 1:30 a.m. and then have internalized as a...
I saw some discussion in the last couple of days about how a picture of him as a young man, and then all of many of his protagonists or the central characters are blonde men. That's about the only thing I can think of, aside from just, I don't know, the total deluge of Oppenheimer Barbie crossover memes, which have worn pretty thin for me personally. And I say this as someone who fully has off Friday, July 21st to go do a double feature. I'm gonna do an 11 a.m. Barbie, just in the standard digital, and then a 2 p.m. Oppenheimer IMAX.
Hell yeah, I need to do that. I have been off for a month now and haven't gone to any.
Listen, I'll send you our seats if you want to join. There's 5 or 6 of us going.
What day is this?
Friday the 21st.
Okay, now we're just making social plans while recording.
Well, I encourage anyone who loves cinema not to join us personally, but to... I think some people listen to this will be part of those plans. Hey, maybe Craig's joining us, Jason.
Hey.
But so I say this as someone who I took that day off months ago. I'm very excited and enthusiastic about it. But I do think after the first meme or two, it is a little distasteful. We are talking about
a beloved doll.
Yes, we're talking about beloved doll. It's very important that I don't we should parody Barbie. Maybe we shouldn't parody a weapon of mass destruction that killed millions of Japanese people and fundamentally shifted their society. I don't know. But so what other movies have you been watching aside from war movies? You mentioned you've been watching a couple.
I have. I watched The Power of the Dog for the first time, which was awesome. I love that. Benedict Cumberbatch, who's a guy that I usually am slightly annoyed by.
I like to call him Benedict Cumberfuck, speaking of overplayed Twitter jokes.
I think I've used several of those jokes. But the more fun for me is trying to do it differently, but extemporaneously every time I bring him up to someone. Do you know what I mean? Get a new... now I don't want to
Benedict Arnold Batch.
Yeah, but I like that one too, actually. That's a good one.
Woo, that was the best I could come up of just on Benedict the fly. Too. Yeah. Eggs, Benedict, cucumbers.
Now this is a new territory. I like this a lot.
Really stretching the boundaries.
But he's amazing in this. I really like him. And I also like... I think I mentioned this to you before when we're in a kickball league. No big deal.
We're very cool.
But the old school Western insults throughout the entire thing are so good. There's just so many that I want to start using in modern
just some real zingers.
Yeah. And he calls Jesse Plemons fatso 70,000 times, and Jesse Plemons just hangdog look every time is really funny to me as well. But I also started watching Twin Peaks: The Return.
Oh, wait, started as if anew?
Yeah, I know.
Wow.
It was
listener, I'm in a room that has multiple owned by Craig that has multiple Twin Peaks references. My goodness, I'm choking on wine.
Yes, my wife is a huge Twin Peaks fan, and when the Return came out, we were in a weird thing where I wasn't caught up, and she was watching it with a friend, so she was watching it. So I've seen the first couple episodes of The Return, and then I never finished. And then this week I was like, you know what? Let's do it.
What'd you think?
Oh, I love it. It's yeah, I mean, my wife told me you're gonna love this, which is why she's been chastising me for not finishing it.
It is definitely TV that is cinema.
Yeah,
I mean, it doesn't matter that it's in a shorter format and it was released sequentially, episodically. It's cinema.
It's dope. It's great. Yeah. I love it. But I was struck by how many people have died from The Return, which is such a bummer, but also kind of beautiful, because I know that a lot of them were like Catherine Coulson was actively sick when they were shooting it. Like, she died. She's the log lady. And she died in 2015, and The Return didn't come out till 2017, and it was apparently like, a really big deal for her to be in it. And I thought the scenes between her and her scenes are mostly with Hawk, and there's almost like a knowing quality to it. The fact that the actress is dying, and the way that, like, I don't know, they're just very sweet and like sentimental, and I don't know, I was just really touched by, like,
yeah, there's a lot of
synchronicity,
right? Between like what is external and what is internal.
Yeah. But then I was looking at, and all the people from The Return, or actually all of these people were in the original and The Return, save for one. But Miguel Ferrer, Julie Cruz, Angelo Badalamenti, Al Strobel, Catherine Coulson, Harry Dean Stanton, all have died since The Return. And then Robert Forster also passed, but he wasn't in the original. But he's awesome. So anyways, it's not to be a bummer, but like, damn. It's just a lot of like really talented
Lynch
people.
is not someone that shies away from mortality.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. So it kind of makes sense to me that it would pop up. Not just them. I don't mean it's some weird diffuse way that people are dying because they're in it, but just like, I mean, he works with older.
Yeah, and
actors.
These are all like longtime collaborators too.
Right.
I mean, Harry Dean Stanton was old when.
I mean,
they did,
he was
Straight Story.
I was gonna say he was old when we were children, and we're in our 30s.
And
so
forever will be in our hearts. What about you? What have you been watching?
So I have like an audiobook, a movie, and a show that I want to bring up. So I want to kind of span
Let's do it.
The modalities. So the first is the show, which is called Warrior. Have you seen it?
I had not heard of, and then I was reading what you were going to talk about very briefly, and I looked it up, and I was like, this seems dope. I'm going to let you tell me about it.
Oh my God. So I discovered this show, which I think I'm not going to look it up. Fucking, shoot me, whatever. It was on some like smaller streaming service and channel originally. Like, it might be Stars, or like, honestly, it might have been like Cinemax or something weird like that. Wow. But Max got it during Max picked it up. Not picked up the show in terms of renewal, but like purchased the streaming rights to the show during the lockdown portion of the pandemic. There are. I'm getting there. So there were 2 seasons from this pre-existing show. Max was streaming them. Then they announced that they renewed it. But it's like during the pandemic. And so I am personally like, Mike, my husband, and I watched it. I loved it. The best way I can describe it is like, so it takes place in the 1870s in San Francisco, and it's about gang warfare and dominance and competition for like the economic resources in the area. And most of those gangs are Tongs, which are Chinese American and Chinese gangs. There's also all the stuff that's going this immediately post Civil War. So there's like some of that's happening. It's taking place in San Francisco. So there's like all of the immigration debates that are going on, like the Chinese Exclusion Act, all of this stuff is happening simultaneously. Plus there's a lot of intergroup tension between the Chinese and Chinese Americans and like the Irish Americans that are there. And there's all the political stuff. So it's like, if you like Game of Thrones, but want it to be kung fu.
Hell yeah.
And also take place in America during the antebellum period. It is ill. I will say, and the reason, part of why I compare it to Game of Thrones is like there is sexual violence in it.
Okay.
So might not be something, be selective about who you're viewing it with, or if you yourself have experienced that. Maybe you want to be cautious about watching this. It might not be for you. But if that's not something that turns you away, you should fucking watch this show. Yeah. And the 3rd season just started releasing. So my point in saying all about my journey to start watching it is that I assumed when HBO Max was like, yeah, we renewed it, that it was going to die and I was never going to see it again. But it's ill and I love it. Also,
Cinemax, by the way.
Cinemax. Okay. See, I knew it was something where I was like, I absolutely don't have access to that until HBO purchased the
dad channel, if they're ever. Well, now that it's become more available, but there's a few channels that I think were just like, secret
you have
codes
to be
that our
45
dads
years
had.
old. Yeah, you have to be 45. You have to show your license proving that you're 45 years old.
Whatever channel that show Spartacus was on.
Yes.
Burn Notice. I'm sorry.
Burn Notice.
Okay,
That's so specific, but it is that is a dad show.
Sure.
And also, like, I don't know, middle-aged moms. I feel like my mother-in-law likes that a lot.
Yeah, that Bruce Campbell, he's saucy.
Yeah, but the main tong, or, you know, again, kind of gang in the show is called the Hopway. And the Hopway, everyone in the show that's in a gang has essentially like a uniform to make them distinguishable during fight. I mean, that's the narrative reason, right? Like
Mortal Kombat.
Yeah, exactly. Everyone has like uniforms, so you can tell in mass fights like who is who. But the Hopway, who like that's who the primary characters that we follow are associated with the Hopway, where their uniform is a black 3-piece, really well-tailored suit.
Ooh, I like that.
With a white button-down, no-collar shirt.
Oh, a Nehru.
I have no idea. Please look that up while I finish describing this because I'm fascinated. A red handkerchief, like, in the pocket of the suit, and a, like, bouffant, like a greaser-esque, like, dude bouffant. And it is truly, like, maybe the most attractive outfit I've ever seen in my life. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. Say that name again.
Nehru collar.
Nehru collar. Okay.
I don't know why I know that.
Yeah, I'm impressed.
Thank
That's
you.
a good like Jeopardy trivia bit to ferret away. But I have like immutable beliefs about evergreen attractive styling. Like, I don't know if I've said this before. I believe that like every human being, literally every single human being on earth, I will put dollars behind it, like looks hot with a septum piercing.
Oh, okay.
I'm going to add this to my list of those things, like this outfit, the Hopway uniform. But yes, if you
Hopways
want
and nose rings really.
Oh my god! If all of them had nose rings, I seriously multiple times during the show, I'm like, wow, they're so hot. But yes, if the idea of Kung Fu Game of Thrones sounds good to you, it's based on the writings of Bruce Lee, has a lot of Asian American actors in it, and there's a lot of politicking, including like women being central to that.
Cool.
Highly recommend.
Oh my god, I might watch that tonight.
You should.
It sounds cool.
You should start.
Fuck this Twin Peaks shit. I'm watching Warrior.
Warrior. It's literally just called Warrior.
When I saw that at first, I thought you watched that Tom Hardy UFC movie.
Oh my god, absolutely not.
And
I don't want to watch real UFC.
And I never watched that, but I was because like, what is Hopway and the Tom Hardy UFC movie? Who's he fighting in that? Joel Edgerton, I think.
That sounds right. I can't say I've seen it, but it sounds that is a movie that he would be in. You know, that makes sense to me. I meant Joel Edgerton, like that Joel Edgerton would play the antagonist in
How do you feel about Tom Hardy?
How do I feel about Tom Hardy?
I have a controversial opinion.
Whoa, I like him. I will say my affection for him is guided by two things. One, in Venom, he executed Venom much better than I expected, and in a way that indicated to me that he does not take himself too seriously, which is something I praise highly in action actors, because I think it's particularly like these big strong men we've talked about with The Rock before, right, get in their heads that they're just like impenetrable, unmovable forces, and like being able to like crack that open a little bit and be able to kind of laugh at yourself, which I think his performance in Venom like indicates that he does. And two, that interview where he said that
where he told that guy to fuck off for asking him about his sexuality, basically.
Okay, I think it is the same interview, but we're remembering different parts of it.
Okay.
He was asked if he had ever engaged in gay acts, and he was like, I'm an actor, of course I have.
Yeah.
So those two things combined make me have some affection for him. What is your controversial opinion?
Hold on, because I want to say that I think the one that I saw was an even different one, where he was like, this guy was like, there were rumors about his sexuality like swirling, I guess, at this time, and someone had asked him a question about it, and he dodged it a couple times, and then very Tom Hardy like, just goes, "What the fuck you on about, mate?" And it's very cool.
Have you ever seen Bronson?
Yes, and that was one of the ones I was gonna say. So my issue with Tom Hardy sometimes is that I think he's like big and theatrical.
Yes, he is.
And then in quieter roles, that looks weird and kind of bizarre sometimes. I'm thinking of the movie. I do not like him in that movie Legendary, about the two like English like twin crime, the Ronnie and
Oh, yes. Wait, he plays both roles?
He plays both. Yeah.
I know what you're talking about.
Which is like tough too, because he has to like distinguish between the two, so he's going real big on both of them. And then there's just like other stuff, like he kind of annoys me in Inception, that little like he's always going a little too big for quieter roles sometimes.
Yeah,
Venom,
I can see that.
Is a home run.
The flamboyance, flamboyance is a teeter-totter, right? That you like gotta be able to balance yourself very carefully on. And I will say, like, in general, I do like flamboyant characterization and really going for it. But I would agree, both things that you named are not necessarily my favorite. But I guess my overall assessment of him doesn't have to have like a firm center. You know, it's kind of like more nebulous. Like all of these various things give me this perspective.
I also liked him in that movie Upgrade for the first 45 minutes until I realized that wasn't him, that was that actor that looks just like him that's in everything.
Oh, that's in I think his first name's Logan. He's also in Prometheus.
Logan Marshall Green.
Yes, yeah, he's in Prometheus, because I think the first like 15 minutes of that movie, I was like, did Tom Hardy lose a lot of weight? Yeah. I will say I do love that guy's performance in Prometheus.
And I like his performance in Upgrade. Have you seen Upgrade?
No, I don't think so.
Upgrade.
Oh wait, yes I have, because the action scenes in it are cool. Nuts. Yeah. And Mike and I Mike was like, "Yo, we gotta watch this."
He has Rookie of the Year arm. And those,
yes.
Did you ever see the movie Rookie of the Year?
Yeah.
That was a very formative movie for a young baseball lover. But like, I love that like in Rookie of the Year, his arm became like, and that is everything that's going on in Upgrade is all of his limbs. Right. He's got a real bad case of Rookie of the Year arm.
Yeah, I have to say, what I recall of Upgrade is that, and this is part of why I hesitated, is I don't think I watched the full movie. It's not uncommon for me, you know, if we put on a movie at 8 p.m. at the house on a weekday, especially, I'm guaranteed going to fall asleep around 9:30 p.m. on the couch. Unless I'm intentionally, like for this, I'm like, I'm watching this movie and taking notes. But if it's a weekday and it starts after 8 p.m., for sure I'm falling asleep. And so that undoubtedly occurred here. But I do recall
the story part of it.
Some wild action scenes.
The story part is basically just John Wick. It's like his wife gets killed. He's got to get revenge, except he gets paralyzed and a chip implanted where he gets to.
Yeah. So I'm positive. I'm up on Tom Hardy, and I am mostly up on Mr. Logan.
We like
skinny
him.
Tom Hardy.
All the doppelgangers. Oh, back to Twin Peaks again.
Doubling.
I'm fully in Dougie Jones territory of the Twin Peaks episodes that I'm in.
You know, Kyle was just having the time of his life recording that.
The Mr. Jackpot sequences in the casino. Love that. Oh, that lady died too when I was looking up who had died. The Mr. Jackpot's woman that followed him around when he was hitting all the slot machines. I mean, that wasn't a very big part of Twin Peaks, but.
Oh, wow.
R.I.P.
Yeah. So, in a tonal shift, the movie that I wanted to bring up, I saw this movie in theaters on Friday. It is called Joyride. It is not the older Joyride. It came out, Joyride 2023, that is about a group of Asian American women who travel to China, ostensibly on a friend's business trip. But it becomes much more unhinged than that. And it is a little bit of drama-infused comedy. It's about belonging, friendship, and how we define family. It also has really raunchy sex scenes in it.
Hell yeah.
And there's probably a solid 45-minute period, maybe about 30 minutes in, 20 minutes in or so, about a 45-minute period from there on, where I was constantly laughing.
That's awesome.
So if you, like me, I actually, about a week ago, I was having a conversation with Mike about how there hasn't been like a good raunchy comedy in a minute.
The same thing. Yeah.
And it actually came. The reason why it came up is because I was watching Jennifer Lawrence on Watch What Happens Live with Andy Cohen, talking about No Hard Feelings. I think is the name of that. And I was like, I don't know, maybe I like want to go see that. I'm kind of hankering for this. And then Mike and I and some friends went to go see Joyride, and I was like, ooh, this scratched the itch. Yeah. And so if you have AMC A-List or some other subscription service, or hey, you've just got like money to burn, you want to see a comedy in theaters, please go see this movie. I want to see more from this director. Stephanie Hsu is one of the stars of it. So if you loved Everything Everywhere All at Once, she is hilarious. It's just really lovely to be getting a movie that is kind of equivalent to what like Judd Apatow was putting out, 10 years ago, about men, about women, and to fully let their like sexuality be a part of the picture. I highly recommend.
Oh yeah, and this woman that directed it, Adele Lim, has got some. This is her directorial debut. I was just looking at her IMDb, but she's got some bangers in her screenplay. She did Crazy Rich Asians, and Raya and the Last Dragon. She wrote the screenplay for both those. So.
Yes. Yeah, she crushed it.
Oh yeah,
it's very like I said. It's about 20. It takes about 20 minutes for it to kind of gear up. Some of the early jokes were not hitting for me, and I was like, oh no, where are we going? But then when it like unlatches its jaw and like swallows you like a fucking snake, it's just like
great. I love that.
Good ride all the way down.
Was the theater full when you saw it?
It wasn't full, but it was pretty crowded.
So
and
it was like a lot of good.
Yes.
I love that, like seeing a
other
comedy
people
with a
laughing.
theater.
Yeah, other people laughing. And also like maybe there's a part that I didn't laugh at, but other people are laughing, and then they kind of cascades together. And again, I mean, there's like full frontal. There's a shot from inside someone's pussy. Like it's bonkers, and I fully encourage people to see it. And then the last thing, which I'll mention very briefly, is the audiobook. I started listening to SPQR by Mary Beard, which is a classic of like accessible Roman history, of the Roman Empire centered around Rome specifically. And the thing that I've heard most so far that I was like, I want to bring this up on the podcast because it was an interesting perspective, is that she talks about how contemporaneously there were Romans who viewed the Gallic Wars, right, which is like the Roman invasion into Gaul, which were led by Julius Caesar, as genocidal. Like maybe that exact word wasn't used, but like there were critics that talked about the wars that way. And that's something that I think sometimes when people talk about things being of their era, that we get this idea that like having a set of ethics or having a critique of power or having a critique of suffering is not new.
Sure. Yeah.
Now it may take different forms, right? There may be precise contours of language that are different. But while she was talking about that, I was just like, and Mary Beard is not who reads it, so it's a different woman. But I was like, damn, that's a cool perspective, and I look forward to digging into that a little more. Is that like
the perspective she is writing from, or that she's just addressing that there are some who think that?
She's addressing it from that perspective. The point of the book is like, and why I am listening to the audiobook of it or whatever, wanted to consume it in some way, is it is considered like the benchmark of a rigorous piece of historical work that is also accessible.
Oh, awesome.
And she tries to do, and it's not like consistent all the time, but she tries to speak to differences in historical record or like why perspectives change. Like, historians 100 years ago viewed this about Rome, but now because we have XYZ, we have the ability to look at like what Roman people's diets were because we can inspect their shit, which wasn't possible 100 years ago on, under a microscope and do testing to it and shit. That she reflects on kind of like the historiography, right, of like the making of history in addition to like putting forth her own interpretation, and her big thing is like there's no singular narrative of Rome. So I waited for it for a very long time on hold to get it from the library, and I'm excited to keep digging into it.
That's awesome. Well, moving on to current events, what's going on in the world that's either got you celebrating or living in despair? Is it a double despair day?
I think it's a double despair day, but mine is like less despair and more like just, I mean, I guess there's despair at the core of it, but that's not like the immediacy of the emotion that I'm experiencing. But I just wanted to bring up, we have not talked about the Titan disaster.
We have not.
And we've recorded several podcasts since it occurred. And I don't want to fully go into it. I think probably many of our listeners have like read the New Yorker article that came out that is a good deep dive, or maybe they're fans of Robert Evans, like I am, Behind the Bastards.
Oh, yeah.
Who has 2 really great episodes.
I haven't listened to them yet,
they're definitely worth digging into. So I'm not like trying to like relitigate or fully dig into what happened there.
I'm a big fan of that guy's son.
The stepson?
Yeah. Did you follow that guy?
Yeah. Oh, yes.
The stepson that was while they were still in the missing stage. He went to a Blink-182 concert and wrote, "This is what is what my dad would have wanted." Or
when that was coming out, if you had given me an over-under on how many like restraining orders are against him,
oh my God,
would have taken the over, and I would have been correct.
Oh my God.
Unless the over was like 7.
He was also responding to thirstily responding to OnlyFans models while the search was still ongoing. This guy, a true king amongst men
some psychologist should take one for the team and write a profile there, because there's a lot to lot to bury yourself under.
So that guy is awesome.
Yes. This podcast is pro that guy. No. But while, I'm like consuming media about this and trying to like wrap my head around Stockton Rush's follies, it made me think about the Schlitterbahn disaster that happened in 2016. Are you familiar with this at all?
No.
Okay. I put it in our doc, and we should definitely post it in the like Twitter thread or whatever when this episode comes out. But there's a great Texas Monthly article on it, and honestly, a lot of the documents for this lawsuit are online. So if you're someone like me who's a psycho that like used to work in a law firm and loves to dig into, I miss the smoking gun, having everybody's
mugshots,
like files. Like I want to read let me read the depositions, let me read the interrogatories, let me read the discovery requests. Like I want to read them, but you can read that for the lawsuit associated with this. But basically in 2016, a 10-year-old boy was decapitated on a water slide, and the reason why that happened is because like the son of the owner, or maybe I can't remember this exactly, maybe he was the owner at this point in time, but the son of the owner thought that he could design his own water slide, and it repeatedly was injuring people. They had received multiple fines and inquests from regulatory agencies and stuff, and he just kept making it worse basically until a little boy's fucking head rolled down the slide because of it. Separate from his body, to be clear. Many people's head rolled down slides attached to their body, presumably, in Schlitterbahn
it works
parks.
Right. I don't think roll is quite the right word. Your slide is
fair. We can be specific.
Flung.
But the reason why it made me think of this, I think there's like a couple of things that come up for me, and like one of them is like the failure of regulatory bodies, and like breaking down like what should the state's function be as it relates to safety and compliance, right? Like, and the utter failure of that in both of these instances. Then there's also something here about wealth, right? Wealth is insulation, that like rich men think the physics don't apply to them.
Right.
Like Stockton Rush. Yeah, he was like, oh, we're going to use carbon fiber in this and it just will work. And it's like, sir,
buddy,
there's like decades of testing by people much smarter than you that this doesn't work, but you've decided that your will dominate physics.
And that video that came out of him talking about it.
Yes.
Oh my God. If no one's seen the video, it's him like we're kind of the bad boys of the industry. We cut some corners here and there, and we broke all the rules. And
in fact, we have to break rules. You have to break things to rebuild upon them, like that kind of attitude. And the fucking fail son of the owner of Schlitterbahn who did this.
Also Blink-182 fan. Those guys would get along, I'm certain.
I don't know. I believe this guy was like in his 40s so maybe. He's kind of in that the Blink-182 generation gap.
A dude that thinks he can design the perfect water slide and a guy that goes to a Blink-182 concert while his family's missing. Those guys are getting along
like gangbusters.
like gangbusters.
But, again, just of like, I don't need to use like scientific knowledge to make decisions here because the risk is not to me. Though incidentally, right to Stockton Rush, the threat was to him. And then there's also something here with like the limits of the law is redress, that law can only be reactive, right? Like agents of the law, police, could theoretically intervene if empowered to do so. But, and I'm not saying they should fuck the cops. Just as a side note, in case anyone confuses where I stand. But just like that's how the courts work. Maybe I should be more specific. How courts work is they're reactive, right? So they, like, a mistake has to be made. A failure has to occur. Carbon fiber has to engage in rapid delamination. Sorry. Something I learned during this.
You that.
Yeah,
you
right.
Talk to me.
Like, law can only react after a young boy has been beheaded by a metal horizontal pole across the crest of a water slide hill.
Oh wow.
Yes.
I never knew like the details of how that happened.
Essentially, the physics of it were bad, and it like there was a metal bar that held the net. Like if you've ever been to a water park, there's oftentimes, if it's open mouth and it's tall, there might be like a net over the top of
so
you.
The bar that was
but the problem is that like where the crest of the first hill was, it propelled people off of it into the bar.
Jesus.
Yes. And like people are breaking fingers. I mean, it was not, the young boy who was decapitated was not the first injury, and even not the first grievous injury, though obviously calling a beheading a grievous injury is a little light touch, if you will, right? But so there's just, it was like evoking this for me. I was thinking about it a lot, and in terms of like, it's got me living in despair just thinking about how there's so much disagreement, there's so much conflict over defining what the role of the state should be in keeping people safe, and that rich men, and frankly rich women too, but especially maybe especially rich men, are insulated from the results of those conflicts and can essentially do whatever they want, including attempt to defy physics. So how about you, Craig?
So I'll keep the bummer stories coming.
Ooh, shitty train. Choo choo.
Hell yeah. This past week, Leon County in Florida, which is the county that we live in, they're reviewed their first book that was challenged by a parent in the Leon County School District. And with that, actually, I think this has been out for a minute, but you get to see like the actual complaint. And I don't know, I think it's important to see a little bit just how, I mean, we know why the complaints are happening, but just to see how simplistic the complaint forms and how quickly any book can essentially be pulled.
What I recall I read a write-up, so I haven't looked at the form directly, but I read a write-up that was done by some other parents that attended the meeting, that's in like a Facebook group that's specific to Leon County schools that I'm in, who said that like the form was not even entirely filled out, right? Like, is that accurate?
Yeah, I mean, you can see here, I have it pulled up here, and the Tallahassee Democrat has an article about this where you can also link to the form. I would say it's mostly filled out. It's not terribly meaningful or descriptive. So basically, the book that got challenged is I Am Billie Jean King, like a book made for little children. I think this is like an ages like 6 to 8 book. That's a part of a series about inspirational people. And we can see the parent complaint. It says, "What do you believe is the main idea of this material? Sharing Billie Jean King's life story." So by admission, that is the parent's idea of it, of what it is about. And then here's the big question on these forums. To what do you object? Please cite specific passages, pages, sequences, etc. Why do you object? I object to material that discusses being gay and what it means to be gay. This book explains that Billie Jean King was married to a man but decided she was gay. It discusses that being gay means if you are a girl, you love another girl, and that you can't choose who you fall in love with. And yeah, so that book has been pulled from Leon County shelves pending approval. And I'm hopeful that it will go back on shelves, but I think it's important just to see how easy that this process can be weaponized and is being weaponized. I've heard in other districts of people who don't even have kids in the district sending the schools lists of thousands and thousands of books, knowing that even if the books don't get, they go through the process and they get approved to be put back on the shelf, well, just sending that many en masse is going to clog the system and at least get those books removed for however long it takes to do this. So, I mean, it's just, I don't know, it's just kind of shocking to see how simple it is for a book to be removed.
Well, and I think something that we, by which I mean like leftists and frankly also like liberals, should learn from the last, from the Trump administration at minimum, and frankly from before that really, is that oftentimes conservatives are simply aiming to gum up the process in order to eventually deconstruct it and blow it up. Yeah. And like that, not only are the complaints like not like ethically or morally legitimate, that they're politically illegitimate because they're targeted to stop the process from working, rather than like to gain an intended outcome. If the book gets banned, they have achieved their goal, but they've really achieved their goal by making school districts and school boards associated with them do this all the time and deal with it as a threat and be afraid that any new book is like, it's really about like preventing governmental administration more so than whatever the direct outcome is. Though the direct outcome is like the fucking like cherry and sprinkles on top of the shit sundae.
Yeah, and I think another part of the complaint that this parent filed, I do want to point out, was the material required? No, was the answer. Her daughter chose this at the school library. It was not required. They got to pick it out, which I don't think that means anything one way or the other towards the child, obviously, but like, I don't know, it just highlights that you're removing that choice from another kid who might need that book or whatever. Right. Yeah. I mean, it's just a bummer all around. A choice from another kid and a choice from another parent. Like, yeah. Yeah. Sucks. And I imagine we'll only see more of it. But anyways.
I just hope they get tired. Like, is one of my hopes at this point in time.
Yeah, it just gets boring. Like, how many times can we complain about Ibermex Kendi before we move on to the next one?
Yeah. Now, it's not particularly reassuring because who knows what mutating form this takes next. But
I was going to say,
I hope they, to some degree, burn themselves out. Obviously, we need active resistance and challenging as well. But maybe they'll tire themselves out. Maybe they need to take a nap.
Let's hope so. Maybe
they'll realize that they're gay.
Could. I was going to tell them, try some of the adrenochrome on our side. You'll love it.
That's psycho shit. God, kind of related to that. I was anticipating. I was kind of anticipating that you were gonna propose. Maybe you will propose now that I bring this up. That we watch the new.
I'm so excited.
Operation Underground Railroad movie.
Oh yeah, the Jim Caviezel one.
Yeah, what is it? It's called.
Like Road to Freedom, Operation Freedom.
No. Operation Underground Rescue Railroad is the name of the organization.
Yeah.
But the movie is called like Support. This makes for great. But anyway, this movie, while you look this up, I was half anticipating you to be like, this should be one of our next conservative watches.
Not a bad idea.
Because the adrenochrome is definitely part of what they've been wrestling with. Here's a thing that happens, a dynamic that happens with conservative shit shows, right? Their fringe organizations, is that while they're on the fringe, they can say and do really ludicrous things, and as they begin to be pulled into the light of mainstream media and general discourse, the true insanity of those things are revealed,
right,
and then they have to like contend with them. And so this has been happening with, there's a great Vice article that came out this week about Operation Underground Railroad, having to deal with the fact that Jim, what's his last name? The guy who played Jesus in Caviezel, who played Jesus in Passion of the Christ, and also plays Ballard. That's the guy's last name. I know, funny.
Who's a crazy.
Yeah, the guy who runs Operation Underground Railroad,
which is an organization that purports to like save.
They
children
claim that they're
from
saving children, that they're like going into war zones and saving children from trafficking. And Vice records all the ways in which they've lied. Like I encourage you to read the article. But one of the things that they're having to deal with is that this fucking actor Jim, whatever, has been saying all these insane things about adrenochrome. Like, he is fully.
He's been a Q guy for a couple years now.
For a while, and they're having to contend with the fact that they're trying to make claims about being a legitimate anti-trafficking organization while their lead in the movie that plays him is spewing the most extreme, fantastical, farcical nonsense. So that's an interesting thing that's happening right now.
Sound of Freedom.
I knew it started with an S. I was just support, like just typing in S words into Google and being like, why isn't this coming up?
I would say if that premise sounds interesting to you at all, just go see that Joaquin Phoenix movie from a few years ago. That was pretty dope.
You Were Never Really Here.
Yeah.
Directed by Lynn Ramsey.
Yeah, hell yeah.
Whoop whoop. Yeah, that movie is very good.
But Jim Caviezel, cool guy, right? Very delicate portrayal of Christ our King. That movie's crazy.
Very chill.
Passion of the Christ is a wild, like,
God,
especially.
We are so off course.
Yeah, we are. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. But I was actually thinking about while I was reading this Vice. It's written by Anna Merlan. Anna Merlan. Reading this article about the ways in which he's fucking up them trying to gain some legitimacy. And I was just thinking about how, like, as a child, I mean, both of us talked before about like growing up in religious spaces and communities, about how that movie was just like the paragon, you know. It was just like the pinnacle. People, you know, church groups that part of are buying like out whole theaters to go see it together, and it's like, this is cinema. Yeah, this is cinema. And that I don't know, I was just reflecting on that because I hadn't thought of the movie in a while, and two, I definitely hadn't thought of it in the context of me like loving film as an adult,
right? Yeah
and just being like, what? And then secondly, thinking about how it was a little controversial because there were some people, including one of my very close family members, who felt very strongly that it was offensive, that it was hyper violent, and that this is it's a paraphrase, but it's a near direct quote. I don't need to feel like my savior, God, what did they say? Like, my savior died for me. I don't need to see like all the blood and suffering to know that's true. Yeah. This is offensive. So I was just kind of marinating in that after not having thought of that shit for a hot while. Did you see it in theaters?
Oh, hell yeah. I was one of those church groups. I also have like a slight embarrassing admission. So that movie came out. When did that movie come out?
I feel like when I was in middle school. So you probably were in high school?
I was probably middle school too. I was in middle school too, probably. Pretending I'm younger than I am. 2004, so I was 16. Yeah. And like still fully in the clutches of this like evangelical church. but I was like really into horror movies too, and I like practical gore effects and all this. And the second that movie came out, I was like, I gotta buy this. This means a lot to me. And I was like, give me them gore scenes, because I was such a little.
Should I watch it
movie.
For that reason? I've actually never seen it because my parent was.
I mean, it's real gross. It is really gory.
I mean,
so check it out.
maybe. I'm just saying.
Oh, we should watch this.
Mayhaps in the future. Well, we could do like a Mel Gibson.
Ooh, that would be a good one too.
It would, because it straddles a lot of different lines. Apocalypto, yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hacksaw Ridge might be good fodder.
Yes.
When he picks up that guy's torso and uses it like Captain America's shield in Hacksaw Ridge.
Jesus Christ. Okay.
Like, this is very respectful. This feels very respectful.
Honoring the troops.
Literally
nothing but honor for these troops.
All right, this part I might be misremembering, but I feel like the guy's also maybe still alive, and he's like literally, it's like a dude. That part I might be misremembering, but I definitely remember there's a dude that's like got to charge forward, and he picks up a guy who has no arms and no legs, and is like,
okay, I think that we do need to do a thorough investigation. Yeah.
You're also gonna have to deal with Andrew Garfield's southern accent, which is.
I'm fine with that. I love Andrew Garfield.
It'll grow on you, but it is an odd one. But yeah, so I guess you could consider me a fan of Passion of the Christ at the time, bit of a connoisseur. A
bit of a Passion of the Christ.
I also was not aware of the blood libel tropes against Jewish people, which this movie traffics in an insane degree.
Yeah, that's the other wild thing is like his outbursts. I mean, I believe it was slightly after that.
It was like right after it.
It was very, very close.
Yeah.
And as if that these things are disconnected and not
related,
threads in the same cloth.
Yeah, and his dad was a fucking Nazi, so like allegedly.
Whoa, what?
Yeah, his dad was involved in some like dicey like neo-Nazi shit. Every time I declare anything, I'm into search. Can I tell you what I did? I'm into search for Mel Gibson dad neo-Nazi, and I just typed neo-Nazi wiki because my brain is broken. Give me the info I need.
You're so close and yet so far.
Well, we can look in. Now I'm panicking. Anyway, either way, his dad taught him to be Mel Gibson, so that guy sucks. Allegedly a Nazi.
Allegedly. Yeah, well, I think the pod will have to revisit him. But are you ready to begin our descent, or perhaps ascent, into what we came here to discuss today?
Hell yeah, I am. Let's do it.
Okay. So first we're going to start out with a little bit of setting the stage. We're going to talk about what structural adjustment is. I'm going to do a little bit of structural adjustment, or SAP, which is how I'll refer to it for most of the rest of this pod. Do like a SAP 101. Today we're going to get a little wonky, a little policy wonky. I'll say as background and why I want to watch this movie, frankly, and why I have any knowledge of this, honestly, as a backdrop, is that in high school, I was a big Model United Nations nerd. And I often elected to be on ECOFIN committees, or what stands for the Economic and Finance Committee, which is the second committee of the UN's General Assembly, UN being United Nations, because no one else wanted to do economic committees. I was, like I said, very involved in high school. It was one of my primary activities. I won a lot of awards doing it. You know, I've always been a ham who's like overly obsessed with research. Then in the collegiate level, I participated for a couple of years, but there were some personal reasons why that was not something I wanted to continue doing. And also, it's a lot less fun when you realize a lot of the people there are like soon-to-be Wharton grads who aspire to actually work in international finance. Like, it just gets real dark when you're like, oh, this isn't like a theoretical, yes, go-getters, of the Henry Kissinger variety, okay? You know, it's like, it
Happy
just
birthday.
is a lot, God, it's a lot less fun when you're looking around, you're like, oh, these people are auditioning. Yes, please, thank you. That's can you hear the wine? Okay. It's also like the politicking and the backroom deals and all of that gets really nasty with adults and not teenagers, and it begins to mirror real world machinations. At one point in time, I was in San Francisco, the only time I've been in San Francisco, incidentally, for a collegiate Model United Nations conference that's run by UC Berkeley. And I was in a committee where I met with a group of people. We talked about a resolution. That's how ideas are put forth in the UN. And that's, you have to pass resolutions to take action in the course of Model United Nations Committee. And we decided what was going to be, and I was going to write it. And then we planned to meet up at a specific time the next day. So let's say committee was supposed to start at 11 a.m. We were going to meet at 10 a.m. just to review what I had written. So I stayed up pretty late working on the resolution. I sent it to the group of people, like emailed it to them. When I showed up to the room at 10 a.m. to meet with them, they were there already, along with several other people that were not part of like our faction, or what I understood to be our faction, silly me. And they had taken my exact resolution and put all of their names on it and had already submitted it because the chair was already at the dais. So
dirty dealings.
And then mobilized all those people to close ranks immediately before the meeting that we had scheduled. So I have a personal axe to grind.
Well, how did they do with your stolen ideas?
So that I got an honorary, which is like, you know, usually there's a gavel for the room would be that you won the room.
Yeah.
And then there's like essentially a second and third place. And then usually there's like 2 or 3 honorary.
Okay.
And I like got an honorary in that room because to my benefit, the dais or the chair of the committee are also the judges in most committees. So like there is only like they will see things happening, right? And whether or not they're on the side of the people doing those things might vary. And like at least that person,
damn,
bless her, saw that.
That sucks.
But it was
that's cutthroat,
brutal.
Yeah. Do you want to say those people's full names and home addresses?
I don't know them. I think they ejected. Also, I had been in like crisis committees. Like one time I was in a crisis committee that was Eritrean themed. And when you do it at the collegiate level, I was literally in committees with dudes from the Citadel.
Oh, okay.
So, like, it's not a theoretical thing for them talking about how they would respond to, like, insurgent mobilization in Eritrea.
Yeah.
Right? So it's scary. It goes from being like, oh, this is, like, a way for me to think about and learn about the world to, like, these are people auditioning to be Henry Kissinger.
Yeah.
So I have a personal extra grind, but much more important than that,
that's a good
zooming
TV show,
out.
God. A Henry Kissinger replacement, like American Idol type.
Like Paris Hilton's Next Best Friend.
Yeah, but all at Model UNs with like the worst. With Paul Wolfowitz as a judge.
Yeah, excuse me. I'm gonna start projectile vomiting here really quick.
Paul Wolfowitz will come back.
Yes, we will return to him. But much, more important than my personal acts, $2,000 is zooming out that my experience, frankly, is really a lesson in the ideological hegemony of capitalism and the way in which it reproduces itself, right? So one of the major themes that we will see in Bamako is that the global north's domination of international finance networks is a structuring force that defines the terms of quote-unquote development and advances an imperialist mission of ever-expanding avenues for capital at the expense of the humans living in those subjugated nations. That it's not a game, even though the global north treats it like it's one.
Hold on, because I have the pause. Walter voice? Walter who? From the Clint Eastwood movie?
No.
Do I not know?
That's a line from The Big Lebowski.
Oh, how does he say it?
I mean, he's
you might
yelling.
Need to do this because I don't know if I can do the line reading justice. I thought you were legit. I was gonna just decide to do it. Yeah, I just marked the time. Okay. I was gonna decide to do it and just commit to doing it in the Clint Eastwood voice and see if I was right. Because wasn't that Walter his name in one of those movies?
Yes, that is true. Yeah, no, John Goodman's character. Because remember, Donnie is like the dude is trying to remember. Honestly, maybe we keep this in at this point. The dude to provide the context. The dude is trying to remember a Lenin quote. And Donnie is going, oh, is it Lenin? I am the walrus. I am the walrus. While the dude's like spaced out, like trying to remember the quote. And then Walter just turns to and says, V.I. Lenin, Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov.
All right, I'm going to try it. We're going to cut it. All right. We're going to have to cut it if I'm going to go right back. You know who had something to say about this? V.I. Lenin, Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov. Well, pronunciation was never great for me.
I thought that was a great impersonation of John Goodman in The Big Lebowski.
Thank you. I was trying to do Clint Eastwood and
Brava.
But anyways, as Lenin wrote, imperialism is the monopoly stage of capitalism. In Imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism, he goes on to define the imperialism this way. 5 of its basic features. 1. The concentration of production and capital has developed to such a high state that it has created monopolies which play a decisive role in economic life. 2. The merging of bank capital with industrial capital and the creation on the basis of this finance capital of a financial oligarchy. 3. The export of capital as distinguished from the export of commodities acquires exceptional importance. 4. The formation of international monopolist capitalist associations which share the world among themselves. And 5. The territorial division of the whole world amongst the biggest capitalist powers is completed. Imperialism is capitalism at that stage of development at which the dominance of monopolies and finance capital is established, in which the export of capital has acquired pronounced importance, in which the division of the world among the international trusts has begun, in which the division of all territories of the globe among the biggest capitalist powers has been completed. Whew, it's really...
Fucking Lenin spitting fire. Spitting fire.
Stated another way, capitalism pushes toward monopolies because concentration, i.e. vertical integration controlling all stages of the production and distribution process for a particular industry, or horizontal integration, eating up competitors, maximizes profit. As this dynamic expands, global organizations form to facilitate this process. Do you want me to say that part?
Side note, you can read this entire pamphlet and a lot of other historical Marxist texts at Marxist.org. Of course, we'll drop that link.
Side note, because I wanted to add this. If you're in Tallahassee, because I actually just bought this very pamphlet at, darn it, I can't remember their name, but it's an awesome newish bookstore in Railroad Square. That's like a Marxist, Leninist, socialist bookstore.
What?
Right catty-corner to Cap City. It's called...
Oh, I had no idea.
Oh my gosh, let's see.
Wow, this is great news.
And they sell everything at like as close to market price as they can get it. So I've bought a few books there for like $4, $5, $6.
That's amazing.
I'm gonna find it because it is a really cool bookstore, and he curates the sections really well. So like he'll have very specific sections for whatever. Like up front, he usually has, I don't know if they're revolving. But anyways, he curates it really well.
That's amazing. While you look that up, I'll also say TCAC, the Tallahassee Community Action Committee, and if you have an community action committee in your area, they exist across Florida, but also in other states too. They often do like Marxist reading groups where, you know, sometimes these big economic ideas can be hard to probe into by yourself. And so that's always a great option. Do some like guided read-alongs. Did you find it?
Yeah, it's called Lake of Fire.
Ooh,
yeah. If you come out of Cap City for Tallahassee and you look to the right, there's a big mural of I think Jim Morrison's mugshot, and they're the doors like within the mugshot. Jim Morrison.
Hell yeah.
Mural.
That's exciting. Really cool bookstore. Okay, so side note, there are a lot of different ways that you can access and read V.I. Lenin. That we encourage. It's no Walter, but I tried, you know. And on Marxist.org, you can do that for free. So that's cool. But now having some idea, I wanted us to just kind of define imperialism before we get into these specific entities so we can kind of think about it as apertures closing, right? We start with kind of the broadest perspective, have a solid foundation, and then zoom in. So now we get to the World Bank and the IMF Okay. And they're horrible, terrible, no good, evil, menacing structural adjustment programs. So, side note, in May 2020, I made a PowerPoint of some of this information for a Zoom PowerPoint party. You know, it was the lockdown, and we were all trying to figure out how to be social in our binge drinking while at home alone or in very small groups. And we did, my friend group, or part of my friend group, did one where everyone got assigned one randomly. So you brought one and then it got divvied up to another person. So as we're going through this, I want you to just think about, I was torturing someone else by having to present this while drunk via Zoom.
Hell yeah.
So you can tell I'm like super fun to party with. So anyway, let's get into it. So structural adjustment programs, or again, SAPs, SAPs, are a key mechanism of neoliberalism. This is part of why I really wanted to watch this movie and talk about this, is that I think, especially maybe for folks that aren't coming from a super academic background, like this phrase, or this term, neoliberalism, can feel very diffuse, or like what does that mean? What are we precisely referring to?
Hard to grab hold of.
Yeah, and like there's also a lot of different expressions of it.
Sure.
But when we talk about neoliberal economics on an international level, I'm gonna be real fucking specific, okay, about what we're talking about, and that's why we're digging into this here. So SAPs, structural adjustment programs, involve the exogenous imposition of macroeconomic and structural changes within a state in crisis by international and multilateral banking bodies. What the fuck is an international and multilateral banking body?
I know, but I'll let you tell them.
Fair. The International Monetary Fund, or what I'll be referring to as the IMF, and the World Bank, which is sometimes called WB, grant loans to states, by which I mean nations, countries, right? I mean, there's difference between nation states and countries, but for our purposes, I'm using those terms the same way, right? Is a country. So the IMF and the World Bank grant loans to countries undergoing some kind of economic crisis, usually related to currency instability like rampant inflation, and or related to pre-existing debt that the country already has to other countries or to these international and multilateral banking bodies. But these loans have strings attached to them. It's not just you can have the money and there's interest, right? There's something else that's associated. In order to receive these loans, the state in question that's that's facing some kind of economic crisis must commit to these macroeconomic and structural changes. And these changes benefit the IMF, the World Bank, and the countries whose interests the IMF and the World Bank represent and embody. SAPs are guided by 4 principles. Number 1, stabilization, so addressing the economic crisis that I mentioned. 2, liberalization, which means a movement towards a quote-unquote free trade. 3, deregulation, meaning reducing state regulations such as tariffs, price fixing. There can also be part of deregulation is like removing economic regulation or environmental regulations. And number 4, privatization. This is a really big one. It's going to come up a lot when we talk about this movie. And privatization would be moving away from state ownership of industry and slashing government expenditure on social services. So the IMF may give you the loans, but your state must enact forced austerity,
reduced budget deficits,
devaluation of currency to promote exports,
reduced expansion of domestic credit,
freezing controlled prices and interest rates,
reducing barriers to trade,
privatizing state enterprises,
removing state subsidies,
imposed monocultures. An imposed monoculture is when developed, quote-unquote developed countries, right? That's a very specific track of development. When developed countries force a country to produce a very narrow range of cash crops as part of the structural adjustment policy. It's a tool that's borrowed from colonialism that can have devastating impacts on the environment. It can also prevent a targeted country from growing a diverse range of crops that best serve its population. And because of that, it undercuts self-sufficiency while destroying the planet. An example of this might be a country, the IMF and the World Bank and countries attached to it on the powerful side of things might say to a South American country or a Central American country, you have to grow a lot of bananas because we want to export bananas from you at a lower price because they're abundant, and so we can get them at a lower price. You must do that. Well, maybe doing that is at expense of the country who's growing those bananas, growing a wide range of crops that actually serve the people that live there. And again, it's also bad for the earth. So SAPs are really an Ouroboros of shitty self-sustaining policies. The circle of debt is vicious. Sometimes SAPs are enacted as relief from a previously implemented SAP. In 1996, following a cycle of debt crises and international mobilization, the World Bank and the IMF announced the Heavily Indebted Poor Countries Initiative, the HIPC. This debt forgiveness initiative gave relief to 22 countries by the end of 2000, but the program gave the IMF and the World Bank even more control over a state's economic policy and contained even more SAP requirements. So they said, oh, you're suffering. Number one, your country is suffering because of colonialization. So you're in debt to many of the countries, like in fact, to many richer countries, including oftentimes the country that colonized you in the first place. So we're going to apply, we're going to give you loans to address those debts, but you have to apply all these policies. And then 20 years later, you're experiencing economic crisis because of those remaining debts. Now, guess what? We'll give you money, but you have to apply even more SAPs, continually undercutting economic growth in the country in question and having devastating impacts that we're going to dig into here. So let's answer the so what question. Let's get into those impacts just in case it isn't glaringly obvious. Here are some implications. The IMF and the World Bank claim that SAPs reduce poverty. Is that true? That's an empirical question. We should be able to know, right? Researchers found that adjustment lending, which is another way that we can refer to SAPs, right? Because it's lending, it's loans that are attached to some structural adjustment, reduces poverty's sensitivity to the aggregate growth rate of the economy. What do I mean by that? It means that under SAPs, under structural adjustment policies, the poor benefit less from periods of economic growth that their country faces than if those policies were not in place.
Increases in preventable diseases such as TB and irreversible health deterioration due to quality of care declines and budget cuts.
There's also repressive state violence in response to protests against SAPs. So there's a lot of examples of this. If you don't know who the Zapatistas are, I encourage you to look that up as leftists. I'm not going to get into that right now, but they're an important group to know. And a lot of what they faced was because of their protests against SAPs, basically. But very concrete, in 1989, 600 protesters were killed in Venezuela in response to IMF and the World Bank dictating fuel prices.
Also, the SAPs have led to large-scale public sector job loss.
There's natural resource depletion.
Violation of treaties with indigenous peoples.
SAPs raise serious issues of national sovereignty, disenfranchisement, and democracy, as the policies are being dictated by international bodies that have zero accountability to the people living in the country in question.
And SAPs push states towards a charity model and away from a developed welfare state system, wherein one-off NGO programs are intended to replace comprehensive state policies.
It leads to cuts in food subsidies that disproportionately affect the poor.
Spending more money on interest payments of the debt than health and education spending combined.
Forced currency devaluation produces inflation.
And growth of large multinational corporations comes at the expense of small industry decline. So, we've got a little bit background on the IMF and the World Bank and these policies of structural adjustment, which this movie is going to deal with quite a bit. Let's get a little background on the director as well. The director is named Abdurrahman Sissoko. Is that how we're...
I think that's a solid...
with that
yeah,
one? Good.
I feel like that's a solid effort.
Abdurrahman Sissoko is one of the few directors from the Saharan Africa region that has achieved a degree of international recognition. For his films Waiting for Happiness in 2002 and Timbuktu from 2014 in particular. As described on his Cannes page, Abdurrahman Sissoko's work is suffused with humanism and social consciousness and explores the complex relations between North and South, as well as the fate of a much beleaguered Africa. He crosses cultures and continents. Born in Mauritania in 1961 and brought up in Mali, he went to the Soviet Union to attend the VGIK film school in Moscow.
I did also learn from looking him up that there's a 2008 movie called 8, which is an anthology of short films about the 8 Millennium Development Goals. Sidebar, if you don't know what those are, many years ago, the United Nations basically, and other kind of international bodies, but got together and wrote these goals for the new millennium, right? And they're all related to improving quality of life, decreasing child mortality, stuff like that. So this film is an anthology of short films about the 8 Millennium Development Goals, and he is one of the directors of one of them. But the other directors include Gaspar Noé, Gus Van Sant, them vendors, Jane Campion, like we gotta watch this at some point. Like I was reading this, I was like, what?
I've only watched one, but now I was like, I gotta go fill in the blanks, but a Jane Campion kick because I love Power of the Dog so much, and there's a few like big ones I haven't seen, including The Piano.
Yeah, I'm not. I don't have a particularly deep knowledge
of Jane Campion.
Well, I've like listened to, the Blank Check Boys, did a series and stuff, but I haven't seen very many of her movies. But we should definitely dig into this to kind of keep this reflection on international bodies and imperialism going.
Oh yeah. So yeah, let's get into the movie here. The film is Bamako. Bamako is the capital of Mali, a country in northwest Africa that was colonized by France in the late 19th century during the Scramble for Africa, the delightful euphemism used for when European countries invaded and colonized Africa en masse around the turn of the century. It wasn't until 1960 that Mali, or French Sudan as it was known under French rule, became fully independent. For the first 20 years or so, Mali faced the turmoil of a new country, bereft of money and resources. Then, in the late 1980s, Mali's government, an often brutal government of military leaders operating under a single-party system known as democratic centralism, focused on economic reforms to rebuild Haiti, namely encouraging private enterprise and working with the IMF and ultimately raining down the consequences of structural adjustment that Hal just enumerated. Bamako the film puts the IMF and the World Bank on trial. Literally, a group of Malians decide to hold a mock trial in the courtyard of an apartment. Is it mock trial?
I don't think it's a mock trial.
Yeah. I think we're gonna get into that. Yeah. I'm
yeah,
trying to take it from the premise. I knew when I wrote it, I was like, I feel like Hal's gonna call me on that immediately. But yeah, we'll get into that. I'm taking it from the premise in which I accepted it when I started.
I'll let you finish, and then we can go into it.
So it is a group of Malians decide to hold a mock trial in the courtyard of an apartment slum in Mali's capital city. Citizens are invited to testify before a panel of judges what the IMF, the World Bank, and the reigning doctrine of neo-liberalism has done to Mali and its people.
So now that we've set the stage and illustrated the policies that make up the background, the foreground, the meat and potatoes, the whole kit and caboodle of this movie, what did you think about this film, Craig?
I really liked it. I am not as well versed on structural adjustment and the IMF as you are, and had to do a lot of research as I was watching just to get an idea of more of what some of the specifics that they were talking about. But I really liked it. I liked the structure of the movie is really compelling, and I don't know. There's basically the structure of the movie is we're watching the trial over the course of 3 days, I think, 3 or 4 days. Kind of interspersed with just random daily life in Mali.
And people just living their life. And that is foreground and background, right? It's one of my favorite things about the movie is that it's people, one of the main characters is walking through the courtyard with her dress undone to ask her husband to come tie her dress while the trial is ongoing, and people are playing games while sitting outside while the trial is just on the other side of a wall being blared through a loudspeaker externally into the rest of the town.
It's cool. It's well, we'll get to it, but does have those elements of surrealism. And yes, by the end, I think that the trial itself is more meant to be less of a mock trial and more of a weird, I don't know, magic surrealism is the correct word for it, but
yeah, the reason why I use magical realism in my lead in my intro is that so magical realism is when there are some surreal qualities that are injected into what is kind of otherwise everyday activity. And one of my favorite magical realist authors is Isabel Allende.
I think you brought her up before.
Yeah, I think so. Maybe very early on. But Isabel Allende is an interesting figure because her father was Salvador Allende, the socialist leader who was overthrown by the CIA in Chile.
Gotcha.
And there is definitely something about magical realism, particularly at its roots in Central and South America, that is good about capturing like the way power operates and the way in which like everyday people are subjugated by these forces that are much larger than our control, which makes sense, right? Because that's what magic is, right? And so that's why I use that phrase. I mean, this movie doesn't have like anything totally like wild, yes, or like very that could be explicitly identified as like quote unquote magical, but it is engaging with power and its intersection with everyday life in a way that feels true to the spirit of the genre.
Yeah, and
the genre,
and it is surreal in that there are people like you said, just living their lives amongst while this trial is happening. Also, a few stray observations. So the closest thing the movie has to a protagonist, I would say, is Melee, who is like a lounge singer.
Those songs, I gotta look them up. I meant to do that after I finished watching it. Those,
I love that, like,
amazing.
Well, the one that old man does as his testimony is great. Like, that moment is great, and it's obviously not in English, and they don't, at least the version I watched did not provide subtitles for the words of that song that he sings. I don't know if yours did.
No, it did not.
Yeah. But her voice is incredible, and I love that, like, I don't know shit about like musical terms, but that throat singing quality of like everything, and she has like and so did he, but that lightning fast like vibrato in their voice, and those songs are really incredible.
Yeah, her songs in particular just really like stirred something in me,
especially the last
like
one.
They're kind of like they're like dancey but emotive. Like she looks like she's having a good time, but she's crying. Like it's just, there's a lot of like contradiction and like reveling in both sides, right? Like they're being like things that are oppositional to each other but are true simultaneously are being like peeled apart.
Yeah.
Here.
It's really good. And her name is Aisa Maiga, who I think was kind of amongst, like, when this movie came out, amongst the like standout performances of the film. Also, Danny Glover's in this movie, which was...
He's one of the producers.
Afterwards, I immediately was like, what the hell? Danny Glover is in this? There's like a kind of a cool, bizarre cutaway to a show that the people in Mali are watching on the TV. What was the name of the show? I don't remember.
I think it's Death in Timbuktu.
I
definitely have it written down.
Which is kind of like
Timbuktu.
Yeah, kind of like an outlaws, like cowboy show that Danny Glover is in, and also the director is one of the guys as well. Is one of the outlaws in the TV show.
Yeah, I think that this is jumping ahead a little. And I want to say this and then let's take a step back because otherwise it doesn't make sense to situate it this way. But I think the TV show is very an interesting infusion in the movie because a lot of what's happening with SAPS is the projection and forcible imposition of Western capitalistic ethics onto other peoples. And that is, I think, like what this is intended to be, right? Yeah. It's a Western, it's using American Western tropes. People are just fucking shooting everywhere.
And kind of like, not necessarily romanticizing, but at least like a fun fantasy about like the colonization of Mali or whatever. Which is... Yeah,
it's just not... It's like detached from reality and kind of silly and over the top, using Western tropes. And it's like, this is the cultural component of what is being discussed in the trial.
Sure, yeah.
Right?
But yeah, that's all. It's always a joy to see Danny Glover pop up in something. But yeah, what about you? How do you enjoy this film?
Yeah, I loved it. I think it's very hard, and kind of how we stumbled into this movie, right, is me just like doing all kinds of searching with various key terms on Letterboxd of trying to be like, I want to watch a movie about imperialism. I want us to talk about imperialism. I've said before, I think that that's a primary mission of any Western leftists worth their salt is like to understand what America's role has been and unite with oppressed peoples around the world to defeat it. And part of that is like comprehending it as a baseline. But also because of things like the culture industry, if you get like all Dorno on it, is like the culture industry is very much contingent on these things not being exposed, right? It's supposed to pacify and mollify, not like media is not meant to engage, right? It's supposed to like keep us wrapped up in capitalism. And so trying to find like what's an example of a movie that can talk about these like big bold ideas and still like be a good movie is a challenging thing, and I really feel like it succeeded in that. And I love magical realism. The like kind of surrealist elements really made me love this movie, and I also think it's very beautiful. I really liked the bold coloration in it, especially the bold primary colors kind of mixed with the dustiness of the surrounding area. Is really exquisite, and it does not feel like this movie cost a lot of money, but it feels like it's doing a lot with what it has, and I'm really here for that. So yeah, we both really enjoyed this movie. Let's kind of dig into the meat of the movie. I kind of, for our purposes here, separated what we'll discuss into kind of what I saw as kind of the four essential testimonies given in the movie. Like I said, the movie is structured around this trial where basically the citizens of Mali, specifically Bamako, are invited to testify to what global capitalism has done to them and to the people there. And there were four witnesses that really stood out to me that I thought we could kind of frame our discussion around, which the first one, and some of these, I don't know, I had a hard time finding the actors' names. First off, most of these characters are not given names in the film. They're simply listed as like witness 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. And I got the sense, because I saw a few of them, that this was the only film credit they had. So this might have been a lot of non-actors and just people in Mali. So forgive me if I don't have a name for some of the characters here. But the first big witness that we see is the writer, who is played by a woman named Maimona Helene Diarra. And she's kind of the realist of the bunch. She kind of is like the first one to go up there and lay out the kind of general state of Bamako and Mali as a whole. Yeah, I think it's really strategic to have her be first, obviously, in terms of the writing of the movie, because she lays out some like kind of definitions and stats cold. And I do agree, like I understand you mentioned a few minutes ago that as you were watching this you were kind of looking some stuff up. I will say there is a lot in this movie. This is a great, I would say oftentimes what I would encourage you to do is like, oh, maybe you've seen, or not encouraged, but like maybe you've seen the movie and now you're listening to us. This is one you probably haven't seen it. I would encourage you to listen to us and then go watch it, because you're not spoiling. This is not a movie you can spoil. Yeah. It's a movie about sitting with the impacts of imperialism in a really beautiful, well-drawn way. And there are a lot of parts of this movie where people are referring to stuff and it's not explained necessarily. And she's not doing that. Like her testimony, she says outright, right? She starts off by talking about the numbers for the budgets for social services versus debt repayment and how they've like basically been constant throughout the middle part of the 1990s. She talks about how Kenya, while 12.6% was devoted to social services, 40% was devoted to debt repayment. Then she talks about Cameroon. She says 4% of their national budget was devoted to social service. Meanwhile, 36% of it was devoted to debt repayment.
Yeah. So she like really well outlines how basically, the IMF and the World Bank will give these developing countries this money and then charge insane interest on them that is not even basically covering the costs of what they're giving them for these like social programs and things like that. And then the other thing that she is kind of the first to kind of lay out is how the selling of these social programs, like the privatization of healthcare and things like that, is really, really like killing Mali in general.
She also says something that I think is a very interesting dimension of this work, and frankly is true in a lot of work that I've engaged in that is indigenous to oppressed peoples within Africa, that's about imperialism, which is that like calling to account imperialists, but also their like fellow country people who are part of it, and especially part of the continuation of it. So she says something that a quote I wrote down in whole. She said, "The impetus is northern, but the theft is local, done with complicity."
Yeah.
And I was like, woo, it's fucking blistering hot in here. She was like coming at it.
Yeah.
You know? Like,
she also has a great line that I didn't write down, but I wrote on the sentiment that says something about, we're not talking about poverty, we're talking about pauperization, essentially saying like, I'm not here to testify about the poor living conditions, I'm here to testify about the process in which we got here.
Being made poor is the problem.
Also, I want to introduce just probably a recurring segment, but the kind of what would you call it?
The defendants.
The defending counsel is a guy named Rappaport,
Monsieur Rappaport,
who has, bless him, I'm sure he's a nice man, but he basically has to carry the load of being the awful foil to
You mean
every...
the actor's
the
a
actor,
nice man.
yes.
Okay,
yes,
I
yes,
was
yes,
like,
yes,
the character is not a nice man.
I'm sure the actor is, but the character basically is there to put forth every defense of capitalism that we've seen. And so in response to this writer, his response that really infuriated me was, he says that the World Bank is not to be blamed because they helped forgive part of the debt. And she responds by saying that the debt should have been forgiven long ago. It's the interest rates, and her kind of demand is that she says we want new money, basically outlining how they're kind of held captive to this old money system and can't create anything new. Right,
and like one of the things that she brings up in this part is like, again, we can challenge the basis of the debt in the first place because of systems of colonialization and what they're contingent on, and the degradation of resources that push nations in the global south into the situation in the first fucking place. But setting that aside, she says, that's cool. You forgive the debt, which by the way, we've repaid. Classic to basically all debt situations, right? Where you spend all of this money paying off the interest rate that you never can even target the principal in the first place.
Yeah.
So that's a problem. But then on top of that, sure, it's forgiven. What the fuck does that do to infuse like new resources into, like, people don't have jobs, people can't eat, people don't have health care. You forgiving this debt, especially when the forgiveness of debt is attached to us not expanding social services, you're letting people flounder. Like there's no infusion of new blood.
Solved the problems in which the debt was created to begin with.
Right. And people are like still suffering.
Okay, so the second witness I wanted to talk about is, I didn't catch. He's the guy. He's wearing a blue Hawaiian shirt.
Yeah, he's a professor. I do want to say real quick, just because it connects to something that something that I mentioned in the lead-in. So I want to say, like, here's an example. Yeah. This woman talks about, the first witness talks about Mali being able to produce cotton and sell it as an export. And I just want to bring this up like as an example of like one of the imposed monocultures that I was talking about. And final note on her, as I'll say, as I really loved when she talked about how globalization de-civilizes. Mm-hmm. And I was like, that's smoking.
Yeah.
Okay.
She was great.
So sorry. The second witness, I believe I thought that he was referenced as a professor.
I believe so. He had a blue shirt on.
Yeah.
And he's the one that I think that stands out the most to me is he's kind of arguing from a stolen national identity. Basically, he says that, one of his quotes that I wrote down, he says, "When I step out into the streets, I see everything else in Mali except Malians." Basically kind of saying that the IMF, the World Bank, all these debts hanging over them has transformed their country into something that is no longer theirs.
Yeah, I think there's a stolen national identity is an interesting way of conceiving of it. I'm glad you said that. The thing that I like that was resonating for me in that was like social death, because death is talked about a lot in this movie, both literal and social, and so I saw it as like a continuation of that theme, and so I appreciate a different perspective on it because I was kind of collapsing it under that common theme that I was hearing about, like the fragmentation of the social fabric and social death, and then also like literal death and people's bodies and funerals and elsewhere. So that's a good angle, and it makes sense in the context of he starts out by quoting Aimé Césaire, the French writer. So it's like the Malise identity is like kind of always contained under the umbrella of the dominant French identity, and they're speaking French, right? Like that's the way they're communicating. And frankly, when people speak indigenous languages, it is not subtitled, right? Like it was there's a translator,
right?
So I think I appreciate your framing of stolen national identity, because I see that there, but that's not quite how I was conceiving of it.
Yeah, his segment is also really good. One part that I really want to talk about is he, I can't remember what exactly it is that he says, but it causes Rappaport, I believe Rappaport, to say, he who is excessive is insignificant. He would gain in all matters. We would gain in all matters if we avoid being excessive. Basically, he's calling him out for being hyperbolic in his talk, which was kind of a very familiar moment to me in general, especially regarding American politics, just like the constant debate of, especially the last 10 years, of civility in politics when you're arguing about like people's lives and things like that. I don't know. I was just the weight of that moment of like this man kind of bearing his soul and then essentially being told like, let's stay civil here.
Right. You're not being civil, so we won't listen.
Yeah. Anything else on the professor, we'll call him.
Yeah. I think that he, again, kind of connecting back in the same way that I did with the first witness, I think the professor kind of connects back to what we talked about with structural adjustment policies in general, as that he is talking about like hegemonic power, right? This all-encompassing, totalizing exercise of power, because he says that like the IMF and the World Bank and like colonialism, kind of a broader extension, kind of take Mali's resources and money, but they also, and he said, quote unquote, take our mind too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, that it's just like there is no gap. There is no moment of reprieve. It's just all consuming. Everywhere imposed destitution, heart, body, mind, community, nation. You know? And
Rappaport has one of his coldest moments in this sequence, which is he's basically explaining like why he's almost saying why Malians should want to pay back the debt that they owe. And he says, when someone dies in Mali, their families must settle their debt or suffer shame. The same is true for Africa. Basically, like,
whew.
Yeah, kind of, that is a very cold moment there.
Yeah, it's, again, just like the dispensability of death. Like, the extractive value, the value that can be expropriated is what's always most important. It's, woo, that motherfucker.
Rappaport. Shot for shot remake of this, except Michael Rappaport is, hey, you know what this fucking guy said over here? Did you know that very, very, very side note, there's a cut of, it's not on the album, I don't think, but of a Taking Back Sunday song. I believe it's I'm not going to remember, but where they take a Michael Rappaport monologue from the beginning, and it's so annoying, and I do it to my wife all the time just to annoy her, but he's like, it starts off, he goes, a beautiful girl can make you dizzy, like you've been drinking Jack and Coke all morning. And it is real weird that that's in the song, and anytime anybody says Michael Rappaport, I think about that. Don't know why they did that.
I like that. I like that. I mean, I do not like that. I don't like that. Michael Rappaport is like a reoccurring theme on the pod.
Yeah.
Fucking.
Okay.
Can't dodge him. You know.
New York actor has ever been.
God, I watched him. We'll continue talking, and I'm gonna look it up. But he was in a movie I watched recently while friends were at our house, and one of them, someone like made mention of him and like didn't really know anything about him, and was like, it's like younger Michael Rappaport, and they were like, oh, he's cute. I was like, shut up.
He's gonna turn
I'm gonna
into
save you
a nightmare.
from yourself right now.
Okay, so I want to move on to what I think is my favorite part of the movie: the witness that does not speak. He is introduced as a school teacher. I believe the character's name is Samba Diakite, and he is called up to the mic and does not speak. No.
Am
I getting it wrong?
Yes. Diakite is a person that speaks, and then while he is testifying, the man comes up. The man walks up. I'm sorry. Okay. Yeah. Because Diakite...
No. Not the man who sings. There is a guy who comes up. I believe it is Diakite who...
Diakite talks.
He speaks briefly, but when it comes time to make his remarks, doesn't he just walk away from the mic?
Yes. Okay. I see what you're saying. But he is not the man who sings.
No, not the man who sings. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay.
He does, sorry, let me rephrase.
Yeah.
He does speak. He introduces himself as a school teacher, and he says his name and why he's there.
Yeah, and he says that he has a dream of holding a bag of heads of state.
And that's after he has like gone. That's one of the cutaways to he's like talking to one of his friends. Like after he doesn't speak, he's kind of sitting outside listening, because I remember the friend, while he doesn't speak, is like adjusting the speaker wire to see if it broke. It's the
security. It's not his friend. Yeah. Like says that, yes, you're right. He walks up to the microphone and then leaves without testifying. And then very shortly after that, he's outside. He says he has a dream of holding a bag of heads of state. The security guy asks him if the heads are black or white. And Diakite says that he can't tell. It's all the same, and then he's warned by the security guard to not speak of this again.
That was one of those moments where I was like, I really enjoyed all that, and that one will probably stay with me for a while of just trying to like dissect it and figure it out. But I really liked that guy's performance throughout all of that, and that was one where I could not find the actor's name, so apologies to that actor. I don't know. What did you think of that guy?
I thought he was great, and I think that this is one of the ways that the movie excels in bridging the gap between the macro and the micro, is that there are many expressions and responses to the subjugation, oppression, and violence, right? Like it's not a cookie cutter one fits all model where every single person who is testifying or acting as a witness has the same experience, internalizes things the same way, reacts to things the same way. And I think that captures the wide variety of different, both forms that subjugation takes, but also the forms that the ways resistance blooms in people's hearts.
Yeah.
You know, also quick side note, the Michael Rappaport role was in Deep Blue Sea.
Oh, deepest, bluest. My hat is like a shark's fin. One of the great nonsense songs to accompany a movie. Do you know that the LL Cool J song? Does he have a parrot in that movie?
Yes, he does.
Does a parrot live? I don't remember.
Oh, I don't think so.
I don't remember either.
Because he doesn't live.
Oh, he doesn't?
No, he sacrifices himself at the very end.
When he blows up the kitchen?
No, it's above the surface of the water. Okay. He sacrificed himself to save Thomas Jane, right? That's it.
TJ, yeah. We love him.
1999, Tom Scoggins. I have a friend who believed that he was hot in that role.
That was Rappaport's name.
That's
was Tom
Rappaport's
Scoggins. That's a
name.
really good Rappaport name.
Yeah.
Sorry
for the diversion, but I just needed to go back to that for 1 second. Something also interesting to me in the movie that happens around this point in time is we start to see dudes that are seated outside start to turn off the external speaker.
Yeah. Start saying like, this is boring, or like, who cares?
Yeah, or or just seemingly don't want to engage and kind of have their own thing going on. So again, we see contradictions are allowed to exist. People can be put upon and suffering, and also be disengaged and uninterested in participating in the potential like adjudication of the IMF and World Bank.
As would be expected, honestly. Like, I mean,
you're
living in...
I'm sitting outside in the hot, in the hot ass sun all day.
It's
like
not your responsibility to care about the... it's not your responsibility to care about people being held responsible.
For sure. Me saying it's a contradiction is not like a moral judgment, right, of their participation, but just rather this movie is not engaged in some like totally sunny-eyed, like glossy, like, fuck all of these things. And also every single Malayan person, maybe that's maybe a pronunciation. Okay. Malinese person.
I think it's Malian.
Malian person. Thank you.
Yeah.
Malian person is fully, totally present and aware and fully engaged in, in this journey.
Yeah. And I guess we should note that at some point in the movie, a gun goes missing. Basically, a security guard falls asleep and wakes up, and the gun is not to be found, which will kind of come up later. It is around this time also that we have that really great sequence of that we were briefly talking about a moment ago, of the one person testifying gets interrupted by an old man singing a song, like an extended song, like it probably goes on for a minute and a half, 2 minutes. And it's not subtitled, so we don't know what he's saying, but it is very like passionate and raw, and
it
clearly
is
like
sorrowful.
Yeah,
I agree.
It's a great moment. Yeah. And it clearly, like, people aren't interrupting it. Like, people are recognizing it. It's just a really...
Yeah, there's clear, like, deference to him. Like, he's obviously, like, an elder. Like, there is respect that is being extended to him. And he's interrupting a formal process, so you would expect someone to be like, hey, sit down and shut up. But then you see their reaction and, like, his emotion in it, and it kind of... it just takes over that whole scene. It's great. And I love that singing. Is there a... There's got to be a word to describe that, like, back of the throat style, like, singing, but I'm not the one to ask. I'm not sure. I had tried to investigate, because the main character's singing, like, amazing, really is very beautiful. And I had tried to kind of investigate, and I can't find like a list of, because it's obviously not her singing. Like, she's very clearly mouthing to it.
But the voice is like, it's an odd voice, but like really, it's very high pitched. But yeah, it's really good. I don't know. It's hard to describe.
Yeah, it's but it was hard to find. So I didn't find in the investigations for that. It's not like I found something for this either. But yeah, so we hear him, and then Rappaport gets an opportunity to speak again, and he basically says, like, this isn't a line of argumentation that you want to follow. Like, what do you think the World Bank wants, right? It's very classic. You're not being oppressed, because it assumes that the oppressor has to have oppression as its goal in order for the outcome of the behavior to be identified as oppression. And so it says, he says, no, it's not the World Bank engaging in oppression. Instead, what's happening here is corruption, which defers and throws back the responsibility onto Malayan people. Right. Yeah. And the Malayan government.
And there's a good line, I don't remember who gives it, but a good line about the corruption. And let's say, it's the it's when he says that the West is fighting it, but the fight is not as serious in Africa, like the fight against the corruption, which is like, I think almost a funny like line, an ironic line, because by design of the system that they're living under, the African people don't have the necessary structures to fight this corruption, which is why they're holding a trial in the middle of like a courtyard slum. Like, they are fighting the corruption, and this is as much power as they can muster. That guy's just a real shit. I mean, good performance, because that guy's just a real shit.
Well, and also, like, what does corruption on a smaller local scale mean when the system in which the corruption is embedded is totally fucked?
Right.
Like, yes, are there people that are probably getting contracts that they shouldn't have gotten without due process? Like, yeah, probably. Are there people that probably got paid more for a contract than they should have? Whatever. But, like, when you're talking about billions of dollars of exploitation,
right,
and international and multilateral banking institutions defining what your country can and cannot do across the entire nation, well, duh.
The corruption below that is not a
the corruption below it is reflected, right? It's reflective of the shit that's happening above it. It's downstream. It's downstream rather than acting as if it's the cause of the fucking problem.
And in response to that lawyer, we get the two, I guess, lawyers on the prosecution side who are, I believe, real people. Those are their real names based on the little research that I did looking them up. But those two lawyers that speak at the end are both they are those real people. And that's when we get the one guy that really gives a solid fuck you to Paul Wolfowitz in a beautiful way. Which he is. Paul Wolfowitz was the U.S. Deputy Secretary of Defense, basically one of the main architects of the war in Iraq. And who played him in the movies we just watched? I remembered that someone played him very funny. God, which one would it have been? It would have been Vice, right?
Yep.
It was...
Let's see. Eddie Marsan?
Eddie Marsan. Yeah, it was he's a British actor who's in a lot of the he's in all the like Blood and Ice Cream movies, the Edgar Wrights. Yeah. But yeah, Paul Wolfowitz, who's the squirrely guy who you might best remember.
He's really short.
He's really short. Yeah.
He seems very short.
I believe so, and there's also a really disgusting video of him from around the beginning of the invasion of Iraq where he's like going. I only remember this because Michael Moore put it in like the opening credits of one of his documentaries.
Eddie. I'm talking about Eddie Marsan.
I think so, but I think Paul Wolfowitz is also pretty short.
Okay, I see.
But there's a really disgusting video of Paul Wolfowitz about to go live on some like CNN or MSNBC where they're like, "Hey, your hair's looking a little," and he takes a comb out and gives it the most disgusting like across this comb. Oh my God, was that a tear?
No, I just sprayed. I hate to say this out loud. I'm drinking a can of fake alcoholic Monster. The alcohol is not fake.
The Monster is.
The Monster is. It's not
honestly
caffeinated. And it splashed up and hit me in the eye right as Craig said that.
I thought I did such a disgusting impression of Paul Wolfowitz licking his comb that it just produced a single tear.
Nah, I am on medication that stops me from crying most of the time.
But anyways, yeah, look up that clip of Paul Wolfowitz disgustingly licking his comb. But yeah, the thing that he says about him is that he watched Paul Wolfowitz cry crocodile tears and say on the news that every week 200,000 children die in developing nations, basically saying that Paul Wolfowitz was an agent of the IMF or the WB, saying that like this is why these policies need to exist. And then later says, when they're talking about the sentencing, how can they hold people accountable? He says, well, we can't throw Wolfowitz in the Niger. The crocodiles wouldn't want him. The sentences that we request of you is community service for mankind for all eternity. So I really appreciate
in perpetuity, she says. Yeah, I think, again, to kind of connect back to what we talked about at the beginning is there with Paul Wolfowitz, like starting the Iraq war, but making statements about those dying in Africa is like, the macro dynamics are in service of what the nations who are in power need. And then they can use charity to address the symptoms and be able to talk out of both sides of our fucking mouths, right? We can say we gain the benefits of this fucked up system, but also we do these things to try and improve it and make it look better and cleaner and prettier. And fuck that shit.
Yeah, it just points out that it's just like the people at the center of these economic disasters are just numbers to these like weirdo monsters who just perform on television, perform empathy on TV.
And it totally disrupts like any normal sense of logic. Like the woman lawyer for the plaintiffs, she is like recounting a farmer, and she says that the farmer says, "When I sow, why don't I reap?" Like talking about a Malayan farmer. And that fucked me up. I was like, yeah, that's a great, like, that's such a fine point to put on it, is like, who is doing, it's classic labor exploitation, right? Who is doing the sowing and who is doing the reaping? And it's Malayan people who are doing the fucking sowing, and it's the World Bank and the IMF and the United States and other wealthy countries doing the reaping on the backs of the Malayan people.
Yeah. It's fucked up. It's a bummer. Do we want to talk about the ending?
Yeah.
So the final sequence is Melee going back to the club that she's singing at and singing this really beautiful song where she's like, you know, it's like almost a slow zoom in and she's crying, and this song is very, very beautiful, and then a gunshot rings out. And now, do we presume it is her husband?
I believe it's Shaka, who is her husband.
Yes, because I don't think we see the face, but you see the person lying on the ground, and he's wearing similar clothing and looks the similar build.
And it's implied that he has stolen the gun that is referenced throughout like the middle part of the movie. Yeah, and this is why I think, like, you know, death is a really interesting theme in this movie, because it is about like literally people dying because of the consequences of this, but it's also again about social death, of like not having resources and support, that community ties are severed, that like there's a spiritual unwellness that is happening. And like that's what I take by that, is that like sometimes like there are many outcomes of imperialism, and one of them is like total fucking eradication. Is just like totally exploding the people who are on the receiving end of it.
And the fact that the gun like came from this negligent policeman, basically.
Right.
It's like the full circle of like, we see on a very micro level how the policies that put this state in power are also the ones that turn around, and whether they meant to or not, result in the death of one of the people there.
It facilitated the context regardless of intention, which is again another theme of the movie. Yeah,
and a really like solid metaphor to kind of close everything up on. But yeah, do we have anything else that we want to highlight in Bamako?
Again, we kind of talked about it at the beginning, but I just wanted to bring up again, like there is kind of a very unique kind of surrealist quality to this movie. All the action that we just described, all of this trial that takes place in the courtyard of the house, is there's constantly intercessions by people just living their lives. There's like a water spigot that's in the middle of a bunch of seats, right? Like I mentioned, the main character Melee comes out and like has Shaka like tie her dress at the beginning of each day.
And there's people like shouting from the windows from their apartments
outside.
That they live in.
There's people passing through. There's like a goat or a ram maybe that we see like repeatedly is just kind of like hanging out in the area. And that's not surreal in the sense, again, that like magic is infused, but it is surreal in the sense that it disrupts and dislocates what we expect for a formalized legal process, and instead situates it directly in the lives of the people who are impacted. And so there's this weird double bind, there's this weird self-reflexivity where like that shouldn't necessarily be surrealist, but because of our expectations surrounding legalistic discourse and processes, it is in effect. And I think that there's like, I think that's a really powerful effect to
by
impart
the end
upon
is
people.
when, well, not by the end, probably before that, is when you start to get the sense that, yes, when I approached the movie and first started watching, I did get the sense that this was a mock trial kind of put on by the people there. And the more you see like the weight of the performances and the way people react, the more it seems that this is more of a literal trial, that we don't get a verdict on.
Right.
Yeah. So,
which makes sense because imperialism's not a closed door.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Still going. Now, the question you've been dying to ask.
Does Armand White know this movie exists?
I can't. Probably not. Is basically I looked, but I couldn't. And I think a prereq for working at the National Review is just pretending like Africa doesn't exist until it's time to like scare your readers that there's an immigrant invasion or something. Like
definitely imperialism is
it's in the past. It's in the past. Get over it. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps, Molly, is what Armand White would probably say.
By your sandal straps.
But yeah, I don't think Armand White knows this movie exists.
I think maybe the grander question, which requires more research than I am willing to do in this moment, is did he go to Cannes this year that this came out? Because if he did, I feel like he probably saw it, and
then chose not to write about it. Which I think is probably exactly what happened, because I feel like Armand White can contend with like the punchy left movies. Do you know what I mean? But like,
yeah, this is not flashy.
Ones that are just downloads of like misery and pain directly caused by capitalism and imperialism. I don't know if there's a lot for him to work with there.
Right. It's very much crafted as a small, quiet, independent film whose power and impact is derived from what it does within that space, rather than it being like production value or big names or loud music or whatever.
Yeah, I can guess what he would say though. It would be something along the lines of Bamako is designed to make the West feel bad for. It would basically be like that, like common defense that we like the white we feel bad savior. For being white. Yeah. The white it's designed to make us feel bad for crimes of the past. That would be my guess on what Armand White would say about this. And then he'd be like, I like Click with Adam Sandler better, and let me tell you how they're similar.
I will say a thing that, again, as I kind of brought up before, what I like about this movie is that it is pointing the metaphorical gun, in several different directions. But it's not a gun at all, because it wants to defy that trend towards death and towards actual death and social death. And I do think it's like striving towards some form of restoration, and that restoration is oriented at multiple audiences, and some of those audiences are not you, and they're not me, and they're not Americans in general. Right? Because like Americans don't need, especially white Americans don't need to hear, but frankly, like any American probably doesn't need to hear like the ways in which Malayan people have been complicit in the expansion of and continuation of imperialism. Like that's something that's speaking to an audience that's outside of us. And it's good for us to watch movies that aren't just aimed at us.
Also why Armand White wouldn't like it.
Probably.
Shit ain't made for me. I'm not watching it. Anything else we want to add on Bamako?
I just want to say this movie is on Canopy. If you don't know what Canopy is, if you have a library, whether that's associated with a higher ed institution or associated with a public library, you probably have access to Canopy. If you live in Leon County, you definitely fucking do. And you can literally sign up for a library card if you do not have it in Leon County already, online, and enroll in Canopy, like without having to go anywhere. Like you can do this, you don't have to wait. You can do this within seconds, literally. And this movie is on there through Leon County Canopy. You can watch 8 movies a month for free. It has a lot of a global cinema. It has a lot of documentaries. It's just got a lot of good shit that's not available, honestly, on a lot of other platforms. And I would strongly encourage you to watch this movie. It's just under 2 hours. It doesn't take that much of your time. Probe yourself to think deeply about America's impact on the world, including the ways in which America has been a collaborator to international violence and domination, and then decide to do something about it. You know?
I love that. And we'll get you on the next one.
Oh, our next episode is The Mule, which we talked a lot about on our previous episode.
Oh, that one's a fun one.
So get ready to buckle down because we didn't hate it.
There's a lot of groaning. More Clint Eastwood groans coming up.
Look forward to Craig's groaning.
I think I wasted them all in the Gran Torino episode. All right, we'll catch you on the next one.
Bye.